A networking event was organized to foster closer relations between companies. At the venue, Daniel, the department head, couldn't believe his eyes when he saw us, a married couple, and blurted out something unbelievable. "There is no seats reserved for you as a subcontractor. Please head home." "Could you call Mr. Thompson right now?" Olivia, my wife, retorted, and Daniel was taken aback, his mouth agape. "What? It's impossible to call the busy Mr. Thompson for a subcontractor. We can find a replacement for you anytime." "So, you're saying we can see Mr. Thompson? Then, we'll take our leave." It was when Olivia took my arm and headed towards the exit. Mr. Thompson, the president of our client company, appeared on the scene, and as he listened to what had happened, his face turned pale, and eventually, he started to tremble. "My name is James. I'm 42, living happily with my beloved wife, Olivia. I run a factory that manufactures mechanical parts, originally owned by my father-in-law. I met Olivia during our college years. Ever since I was a child, I've loved machinery, so I went on to study mechanical engineering in college. With a burning youthful hope in my heart, I was determined to create new things that would shape the future of society. But reality was not as straightforward, and I faced many challenges in my experiments. Despite coming all the way from the countryside, I often faced disappointment and failure, wondering if this was the extent of my abilities. Yet I tirelessly continued with my experiments. Even when I thought it was impossible and faced challenges time and again, feeling utterly lost, it was Olivia who came to stand by my side. She would quickly solve problems I struggled with in my experiments and tell me, "James, you are almost there in solving the issue. The difference between us is whether you believe it can definitely be done." Olivia's smile and those words completely captivated me. The mindset of believing something can be done, rather than giving up thinking it's impossible, changed my approach. Olivia taught me that, and from then on, I never gave up on anything and saw it through to the end. As a result, I developed a strong mentality that even without much evidence or experience, giving my all would somehow make things work out. This resilience, thinking it will surely work out, became a significant strength in overcoming various challenges in life. Olivia herself possessed this vitality. One day, she shared her dream with me quietly. "I have a dream." "Dream?" I asked, unable to anticipate what it was. "To make my father's factory the best in America. That's my dream." Eventually, Olivia and I spent our college life as good friends. After graduation, I took a job at a local machinery manufacturing plant. I was drawn to their commitment to technical research and the pursuit of more precise and advanced technology. There, to my surprise, I reunited with Olivia, my college classmate. It turned out that the factory was managed by her father. Eager to adapt to the work quickly, I was approached by Mr. Parker, Olivia's father and the president of the factory, who had heard of my dedication. "Are you the new guy I've heard so much about? You seem very committed to your work." "Thank you. I'm just thrilled to work with machinery every day." I passionately shared my enthusiasm for manufacturing with Mr. Parker, just as he had asked. Looking back, I realize I must have really laid it on thick, talking about my college major and the potential for the manufacturing industry in America's future. But Mr. Parker listened intently, without interrupting, showing genuine interest in my story. "I'm glad to have a passionate young person like you join our company. Would you like to learn even more?" Following that suggestion, Mr. Parker began to keep me close, guiding me through even the finer details of the work. Thus, I received direct mentorship from Mr. Parker. "James, you don't have a girlfriend, right?" "No, not at the moment." One day, when Mr. Parker suddenly asked me this, Olivia's smiling face from our college days flashed through my mind. "How about my Olivia? She's around your age and knows the factory work well." Thus, our relationship, which I thought would remain a friendship for life, slowly progressed, and after about 2 years of dating, we got married. United in our goal to make my father-in-law's factory the best in its field, we enjoyed a happy married life. Then suddenly, my father-in-law became ill. Fortunately, I was nearby and quickly called emergency services, getting him to the hospital. Although he survived, his already weak heart was further strained, and he became much frailer. I've caused you worry, but I've seen my daughter's wedding, and a successor for the factory has been found. Honestly, I have no regrets," he said, lying on the hospital bed, pale-faced. Of course, we couldn't accept that. It's too early to be satisfied, we thought, and the entire factory, starting with Olivia and me, worked hard to manage the business until he could return. As a result, he gradually recovered and was able to return to the factory after 3 months. However, despite his recovery, there was always the fear of him collapsing again. At his urging, while he was still healthy, I officially took over the factory's management. I had been working there and learning from him, especially after he took a liking to me, but it was still quite challenging at first. During that time, I must have looked so worn out when I came home that I worried Olivia. "Are you okay? Don't overdo it. It's tough, but I want to live up to your father's expectations, and I don't want to be underestimated because I'm a young executive. I want to learn as much as I can now." Indeed, after the transition from my father-in-law to me, some difficult clients tried to take advantage of the situation. But thanks to Olivia's support and my father-in-law's trust, I was able to keep going. 2 years flew by, and just as I was getting used to managing the company, Olivia became pregnant. We named our son Jake. Holding Jake, my father-in-law shed tears of joy, a rare sight. Seeing my father-in-law, Olivia, and our newborn son, Jake, together, a family spanning 3 generations, brought a smile to my face. Having a precious son further motivated me. Thanks to that, I became even more dedicated to my work, finding my own way of doing things, different from my father-in-law's, and overcoming various challenges. About 10 years later, I was puzzled to hear that Alex, the manager from our main contractor, had been transferred. It was an odd time for a personal change, and there had been no indication from Alex, who had been our contact. I was curious about what had happened to Alex, so I asked another acquaintance at the contracting company, and it seems he was dismissed. I was shocked at how significant his mistake must have been, and even more so when I heard that the specific reasons hadn't been disclosed. As a subcontractor, I couldn't learn more, so I awaited the new manager. According to what I've heard, the new manager, named Daniel, is around my age. He's rumored to be an elite graduated from a prestigious university, unlike me, so I braced myself for what would likely be a long-term relationship. Though I was grateful to Alex for his support, I regretted his departure but knew I had to meet the new manager first. I informed the contractor of my intention to greet the new manager soon, which reminded me to inform my father-in-law. "I see, I'll check on it from my end, so focus on the factory work," my father-in-law said with a complex expression I hadn't seen before. This situation changed the next day. While giving instructions and making my rounds in the factory as usual, a man I didn't recognize appeared. Wondering who he could be, the man walked straight up to me. "I'm Daniel, the new department manager. I've taken over this factory's account from my predecessor. Pleased to meet you, Daniel. I look forward to working with you." Daniel, who crossed his arms and looked down at me, received my polite greeting. However, Daniel didn't reply and rudely stared at me. "Did you really think you wouldn't offer me a cup of coffee after I came all this way? My apologies, I wasn't thoughtful enough." Feeling his cold gaze, I hurriedly prepared some coffee. From past experience, I knew it was best to appease such people. They'd be satisfied and leave without causing trouble. After receiving the coffee, Daniel seemed to cheer up as expected. He leaned back, sipping his coffee with a satisfied look, eyeing me unpleasantly. "You seem to understand your place." Unlike Alex, who always greeted us with a warm smile, saying, "Thank you always, Daniel," by contrast, crossed his arms and surveyed the factory with a critical eye. Just when I felt this wasn't going to be straightforward, I became anxious. "How are you doing?" Olivia arrived with Jake, stopping in her tracks as if taken by surprise. I remembered she mentioned she'd bring Jake by today. As I recalled this, Daniel unexpectedly recognized her. "Wait, you are Olivia." "Daniel, is that you?" Both were clearly surprised to see each other. It turned out they knew each other, but Daniel continued, still in disbelief. "Is that your son? Did you marry some low-level worker because you're the factory's daughter?" "Yes, but what's that to do with you? Who I marry is none of your business, right, Daniel?" Olivia effortlessly dodged Daniel's sudden harsh words. Then, she stood beside me, frozen in place, with Jake by her side. "This is my husband. He's someone important who helps lift this factory up." Jake innocently showed me his elementary school quiz. While I praised Jake with a smile, I was taken aback by Daniel's reaction. For a moment, he seemed to give me a piercing look. But he quickly reverted to a smug expression and began to mock Olivia openly. "So you married a bottom-rung worker for your family's sake, regretting your life choices." Daniel's condescending tone was directed at both Olivia and me. I was quite irritated inside, but with young Jake watching, I tried hard to keep my composure. Then, Olivia smiled brightly. "I couldn't be happier to have married him." Her smile dissolved my frustration, filling me with joy. "What a waste of time," Daniel muttered, clicking his tongue and leaving the factory. "What a piece of work. Really, he's just as unpleasant as ever." She explained that Daniel was a classmate from her high school days. Seeing her reluctant face, I decided not to press further. But now, with such a troublesome person as our point of contact, I was worried. However, I soon forgot about my dissatisfaction with Daniel when I was informed that a major project was underway. After all, the products shipped from our factory were to play a crucial role, and I was fully focused on that. But just when I was focused on that, Daniel contacted me again. Expecting a project update, I nervously picked up the phone, only to be met with an incomprehensible complaint. "What was with your attitude last time? I didn't expect such disrespectful treatment when I, the manager, personally visited. I'm very sorry for any discomfort caused." I apologized, though Daniel continued to rant. "Remember this, I have a promising future. Unlike a subcontractor like you, I could end our business with just one word." After venting, Daniel hung up. I was stunned that Daniel had called just to say that, when another employee called. Apparently, a networking event was being organized to ensure the success of the major project, involving all related companies. This employee had been contacting each company, but upon seeing Daniel's call to us, they hurriedly reached out to confirm. Due to Daniel's neglect to pass on this crucial information, I would have missed the event if not for this call. I expressed my gratitude to the employee and confirmed my schedule. My schedule was just barely open, but the thought of encountering Daniel at the networking event made me sigh involuntarily. On the day of the event, I arrived at the venue early, just to be safe. It was just me and my wife, Olivia, scanning the crowd for any familiar faces. Amidst the sparse early arrivals, I heard a familiar voice from behind. "Why is a bottom-rung worker from a poor factory here?" It was Daniel who had spotted me and decided to speak up. Just as I thought I'd been tangled up with a troublesome person, ignoring him wasn't an option. Daniel looked us over with disdain, laughing mockingly. "Why are you even here? Don't you see you're out of place? Today's gathering is for executives of reputable companies, Not for subcontractors like you." His loud laughter drew the attention of those around us, making us the center of attention. I tried to escape the situation with a polite smile and a greeting to Daniel. "Excuse me, I need to go greet others." "I'm not done talking to you." I attempted to sidestep Daniel, but he seemed determined not to let us go. As I worried about what to do, Daniel approached with a smug laugh, looking down on me. "You don't have a seat here. You as a subcontractor, please leave." "Then, can you call Mr. Thompson right now?" Olivia's quick retort left Daniel wide-eyed and speechless. "What? There's no way I can call busy Mr. Thompson just for subcontractors. There are plenty of replacements for you. So, you can't call Mr. Thompson. Then we'll have to withdraw from the project." With that, Olivia took my arm and we headed for the exit. Daniel, looking smug as if he had successfully sent us packing, made no move to stop us. That's when it happened. "James," it was Mr. Thompson, calling out with a puzzled look. "He's the president of the client company." I stopped to greet Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, you've arrived early. I heard you were coming, so I thought I'd come and catch up with him." By him, he probably meant my father-in-law. I knew my father-in-law and Mr. Thompson had been acquainted for over 30 years since establishing their companies, but I had heard that their meetings had become rare since my father-in-law's health declined and I took over. "Why are you leaving? The networking event is just about to start." "Well, actually, I explained everything to Mr. Thompson, though I doubted it would make a difference. I wasn't close to Mr. Thompson, just another subcontractor." Even if he dismissed my words with a scoff, I couldn't blame him. But I had hoped for something from the long-standing friendship between Mr. Thompson and my father-in-law. Mr. Thompson's face turned pale as he listened, and he began to tremble. "I'm so sorry. This is entirely Daniel's fault. I'll make sure he's properly dealt with, so please don't leave." Mr. Thompson's desperate attempt to keep us there surprised not only us. "What are you saying to these subcontractors, Mr. Thompson? They are just lowly, poor subcontractors with no manners towards their clients." "What are you talking about? Haven't you read the documents for this project?" Mr. Thompson immediately scolded Daniel, who had approached with a smug laugh. Daniel must have never anticipated being scolded himself. Leaving a stunned Daniel with his mouth agape, Mr. Thompson clung to my hand. "I'll let you do as you wish, and I won't hold you responsible. Please, participate in the project. Then I'll do as I see fit." I waited for Mr. Thompson's firm nod. "What about the networking event? I'll be leaving for today. I need to reconsider our strategy moving forward." Mr. Thompson looked down, clearly disappointed. "I'm truly sorry for this incident." After returning Mr. Thompson's apology, we finally left the venue. As we were leaving, Mr. Thompson handed me a small note. On it was written the name and phone number of the former manager, Alex. I planned to call this number as soon as I got home. Of course, I also had to report this incident to my father-in-law. As we quickened our pace, the sound of Daniel being sternly reprimanded echoed behind us. The next day, Daniel stormed into my factory, red-faced. "Hey, bring James out. I need an explanation for this," he bellowed as soon as he entered the factory. Receiving the call, I met Daniel in the reception room, where his anger was evident, his clenched jaw trembling. "What do you mean your factory's parts are essential for the project? I believe the details are outlined in the documents provided beforehand. You dismissed us from the project after deciding we were unnecessary, didn't you?" Perhaps surprised by my sudden retort, having never counted him before, Daniel fell silent. That he could be rendered speechless by just a single comeback suggested he was more sensitive to criticism than I had imagined. "If that's all, may I ask you to leave?" I said, pointing towards the exit, but Daniel weakly shook his head. "I was told by Mr. Thompson, are you really not participating in the project? You know, Mr. Thompson and your predecessor were close, right? Think it over. After discussing with the previous president, we decided to terminate this contract. We're just replaceable subcontractors, right? Daniel turned pale, sweating profusely, clearly panicked. I knew why he was so desperate. Without our factory, the project couldn't proceed. In fact, the project hinged on a product for which I held a patent. Taking a different management approach from my father-in-law, I focused on securing patents. In addition to managing the factory daily, I had been working on prototypes of a product I researched since my college days. With the help of Olivia, who had studied with me at the same university, we finally succeeded in developing it after 2 years. Our patented product, unique to our factory, contributed significantly to our profits and improved our financial situation. The project came about because of our product's reputation. Without it, the entire project would fall through. Despite being a project participant, Daniel was unaware of these circumstances. He probably skimmed the documents, assuming our work was simple because we were subcontractors. Do you have no sense of responsibility? What will you do if the project fails? If that happens, I suppose I'd have to take responsibility. But don't worry, we've already signed with another company. At my words, Daniel gasped for air, wide-eyed. I almost laughed at his expression. On the day of the networking event, I had called Alex using the number Mr. Thompson gave me. I learned that Alex had started a new company with Mr. Thompson's support. Mr. Thompson is supporting us. Would you consider contracting with us? Alex, seeking a contract, shared what had happened when he left his previous company. According to the story, Alex attempted to report the harassment he received from Daniel to the company's upper management. However, a faction within the company, favoring Daniel and led by Vice President Michael, seemed to have suppressed Alex's complaints. Fearing he might collapse under the strain, Alex decided to resign. When he submitted his resignation, Mr. Thompson approached him, leading to the establishment of a new company as a subsidiary. Mr. Thompson, too, was fed up with the schemes of Daniel's backers within the company. Despite Mr. Thompson's efforts, the influence of these factions reached the company's core, making it challenging to restructure the management. Hence, Mr. Thompson was gradually transferring skilled employees to the subsidiary company centered around Alex. In light of the current situation, Mr. Thompson introduced my factory, crucial for the project, to Alex's company. I was set to contract with Alex's new company. Explaining this to Daniel only fueled his anger. What a joke. If this project fails, we're looking at losses in the millions. Just sign back with us right now. But it was you, Daniel, who initially said we were unnecessary. We've already signed a contract and are participating in the project with a new company, so recontracting with you is impossible. I firmly refused Daniel's repeated pleas. After about 30 minutes of back and forth, Daniel finally seemed to realize the futility of his efforts and slumped to his knees. After watching Daniel trudge away with slumped shoulders, we returned to our regular work as usual. Months later, Mr. Thompson visited the factory. He had been working to restructure the company and counteract a faction led by Michael and Daniel. I've caused you so much trouble. I don't know how to apologize. After apologizing, Mr. Thompson shared more details. Daniel, once seen as competent, started behaving recklessly after gaining Michael's favor. Even before our conflict, Daniel had caused similar issues in various departments. However, due to Michael's strong connections, no one dared to confront him. As a result, Daniel developed a misplaced confidence, believing he could do whatever he wanted because he was important. This led to the unnecessary trouble he caused at the networking event, targeting us, the subcontractors he disliked. Even after being reprimanded by Mr. Thompson, Daniel showed no signs of remorse. I was just doing my job. There are plenty of factories out there. so it doesn't matter how they are treated," Daniel retorted, angering the usually calm Mr. Thompson, resulting in his transfer. During my long business trip, Daniel was promoted to manager. I had seen the reports, but I judged solely on performance, missing his character, causing this inconvenience. Mr. Thompson explained, apologizing again. Later, we heard from an acquaintance that Daniel had resigned. After Michael was forced to resign for his actions, Daniel avoided dismissal but became the target of derision within the company. Furthermore, although he wasn't fired, Daniel was transferred to a department tasked with compiling the company's history all day, a position with no real sense of purpose. Feeling frustrated in such an unfulfilling role, Daniel eventually resigned on his own accord. Though he had a difficult personality, he was intelligent. Hearing the story, Olivia remarked that Daniel indeed had capabilities. He had achieved enough to be recognized as a manager by Mr. Thompson, at least on paper. However, his promotion led him to become overconfident, resulting in his reckless behavior this time. Maybe I provoked his behavior. Apparently, Daniel had feelings for Olivia back in high school. However, his attempts to get her attention by belittling her father's factory only made Olivia despise him. I told him, "Don't ever speak to me again. I don't even want you near me," Olivia recounted. After that declaration, there was no contact from Daniel post-high school. Yet, upon entering the workforce and learning his company dealt with Olivia's factory, and now armed with the title of manager, Daniel sought to reconnect, perhaps with renewed confidence. But by then, Olivia was already married to me, with a child in elementary school, which likely didn't match his expectations. The fact that he harassed you out of jealousy is just so immature. I'm really sorry for any trouble this caused you, Olivia apologized, though I harbored no anger. Instead, I admired her firm stance and felt reassured that together, we could face any challenges at the factory. After resigning, Daniel struggled to find new employment as word of the incident spread, leading to repeated rejections. With his savings depleted and forced out of his home, Daniel fell into poverty, resorting to debt and day labor to get by. Despite juggling multiple jobs, working under supervisors younger than himself seemed to hurt his pride. As a result, he hasn't been able to stick with any job for long, leading to frequent job changes. Now, he spends his days drinking cheap liquor as soon as he gets a bit of money, facing complaints even from his neighbors in a cheap apartment. His days of wandering might be near. On the other hand, I am still working collaboratively with my factory team as an executive. Our relationship with the new company led by Alex is flourishing, and we are engaged in eager and fulfilling transactions. Mr. Thompson's company is gradually recovering, becoming a healthy enterprise once again. I look forward to the day when we can resume our business dealings, a sentiment shared with my father-in-law. As Jake became more independent, entering middle school, Olivia found more time to assist with factory work. I am determined to continue putting forth my best effort for my family and our valued factory. I believe that if we face any new challenges in the future, we can overcome them together as a team. Someday, we'll fulfill Olivia's dream of making our factory the best in its field. With this hope in my heart, I step into the factory again today, believing that if we tackle our tasks with the conviction that we can achieve them, we will surely succeed. Hey, don't you guys dare help Michael. If you do, I'll increase your workload as well. The employees made sour faces at their manager Jake's shouting, "Stick to the countryside forever." With such a shout, the troublesome 3-day inspection came to an end, and a sigh of relief was heard from the branch office employees. You endured well. It's all for the sake of the branch. Saying this with a smile, he was thanked and appreciated by the other employees. 2 days later, I was called to the head office. The sound of leather shoes clicked as I walked. Dressed in a branded custom-tailored suit and with my hair neatly arranged, the assembly buzzed at my appearance. Most of the murmurs were about who I was. Chairman Thompson began to speak. "From today, my grandson will be the new president, and this is the president of this company from now on, Michael Johnson. It's an honor to receive such a privilege after working at a different branch for so long. I may not be at the head office often, but I look forward to working with you all." What? After standing confidently in front of the microphone and delivering my speech, applause broke out. When I looked up, I locked eyes with Jake. He was clearly confused and, at the same time, furious, his face turning red with anger. I am Michael, a 45-year-old rank-and-file employee of the company. I guess you could say I'm one of those employees that have been put out to pasture. I was surprised when I got a job at a major company at 22. I worked hard aiming for higher positions. However, before I knew it, I was transferred to the countryside, and since then, I've never been called back to the head office, and here I am at this age. I suppose I'm a laughingstock at the head office, but there's no one like that here in this quiet and peaceful local branch. I liked working in this calm and quiet region. Above all, it was good to be able to commute from my parents' house. A few years after I got a job, my father passed away suddenly, and I went back home. My parents were a close couple for many years. My mother was busy with funeral preparations, but once the series of events was over and calm returned, she fell. While I was taking time off for the funeral and to care for my mother, suddenly I found myself transferred to a local branch. It was bothersome to be pitied by others when I went back to the head office to collect my belongings. Demoted within a few years of joining, what did he do? Did he get in through some misconduct? He does look like a country bumpkin. Ignoring the whispered conversations, I calmly cleared out my desk and headed to the branch office. Though people talked about demotion, honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to leave my ailing mother alone at home. Being transferred to my hometown was a blessing in disguise for me. I was planning to resign and look for a job locally if necessary, but my mother opposed it. Moreover, I kept extending my leave out of concern for my mother, and so I believed the demotion was inevitable. This small branch was said to be a place where once you settled in, you couldn't expect a promotion, but the employees were all nice people, and they understood my situation with my mother's nursing. It was a much easier environment to work in than the head office, where everyone was competing and never at ease. 20 years have passed since then. I am satisfied with my life in this area. Michael, this is for you, from my home. First thing in the morning, an employee who had just arrived put a cardboard box filled with a large quantity of vegetables on my desk with a thud. "Well, that's a lot, are you sure?" When I was pleased, the young employee smiled brightly and said, "I always appreciate your help," before returning to his own desk. This branch has many people who were deemed unnecessary by the head office and transferred here, but generally, new employees are hired locally. Perhaps because of this, many employees come from families of farmers or dairy farmers. Thanks to this, I can provide my mother with fresh vegetables and eggs. After losing my father, my mother fell ill and was bedridden for a while, but as time passed, she now lives a calm life at home. However, perhaps due to the impact of being so weak at one point, she's not exactly bursting with energy, and it feels like she's recuperating at home. Still, I think she's found her own peace, tending to the flowers in the garden and carefully nurturing the fruit trees, which were my father's hobby. She does the household chores when she feels up to it, but I generally handle them, and I've come to pride myself on my proficiency. What's this? Smells like the countryside in here. As he said this, Jake from the head office walked into the office. We were supposed to have been hired in the same cohort, but to be honest, I don't remember much about him. However, He seems to find it hilarious that I, same age as him, am in this branch office, and he takes every opportunity to mock me. He is a troublesome character. He's here for an inspection and will be staying at this branch for about 3 days, but instead of working, he mocks this idyllic place and belittles the employees, spending every night drinking with the big shots who came with him. Hey, Michael, you've finished yesterday's documents properly, right? Yes, here they are. I believe it was originally Jake's task, but I was the one who ended up having to compile the documents for the meeting. Thanks to that, I had to start work early today. It looks decent enough. Well, it'll do. Without a word of thanks, Jake quickly glanced over the documents and returned to his desk. Damn, the chairs in the countryside are hard. He grumbled, but sat in the best desk and chair in the office. The atmosphere of the office, which had been bright until then, suddenly turned gloomy. Not a single voice was heard. It was silent. In the city offices, chatting is strictly forbidden during work, Jake said to us, hence the silence. Indeed, in the city, with its multitude of people and work, concentration might be necessary. However, in this branch, employees communicate with each other, work without accumulating stress, and enjoy their work. It used to be such a place. Still, we decided to endure quietly and work in silence for these 3 days. The clock chimed the end of the workday. Well, I'll be leaving now, everyone, I said, starting to prepare to go home, when Jake approached me. What are you talking about? There's still work to be done. But I've completed all the tasks for today, and overtime isn't encouraged. Shut up. It's normal to work overtime if there's work left. Jake's palm slammed down on my desk with a bang. The others will stay too, right? Glared at by Jake, a few employees who were preparing to leave reluctantly returned to their seats. Among them were those who had chores at their family homes to attend to. That's why, unless absolutely necessary, this branch has no overtime. Unless it's an urgent matter, today's work is done today, and what can wait until tomorrow is done tomorrow. If someone is swamped with work and looks like they'll have to do overtime, someone else who has some leeway helps out. That's how we managed our work. Just because there's still work doesn't mean we have to force ourselves to do it all today. That's the understanding here. Jake, I'm sorry, but some of them have to help out with their family's businesses. At my words, Jake sneered nastily and said, Then, you'll stay and finish their work. He turned to the other employees with a dismissive gesture. Go on, you all can go home. Michael will take care of everything left. No, but Michael, your mother is. Then you all should take care of her instead. Leave. After snorting, Jake returned to his desk, and the others, looking guilty, left their work on my desk and left. After making sure all the employees had left, Jake said, You'll finish all this work before you go home, and left the office with a mocking tone. He's probably heading out to the nightlife with the other big shots from the head office. I sighed heavily at the mountain of work piled up in front of me. But if I don't get this done, it's the other employees who will suffer. They left apologizing with faces full of regret, saying I'm sorry. Some of them might have even gone to check on my mother. I need to do this for the sake of these kind people. I informed my mother via text that I would be late and returned to my work. After working overtime, I came home quite late, only to be welcomed by my mother. She had prepared dinner, and while I was happy to enjoy her cooking after a long time, I worried that it might have been a burden on her, given her frail health. As I feared, my mother wasn't feeling well the next morning. I considered taking a day off, but since she didn't have a fever and only felt lethargic, she insisted I go to work. I told my mother to rest well today before I left for work. Upon arriving at the office, I noticed a crowd around my desk. What could it be? As I approached, curious, Jake noticed me and called out loudly before anyone else could speak. "Michael, I've prepared some work for you today. Be grateful," he said with a loud laugh, slapping my desk. I sighed heavily. Through the gaps, I saw a towering pile of documents on my desk. Nowadays, most tasks can be handled on the computer, yet Jake insists on having similar work done on paper instead of digitally. Our branch is small. There are busy periods, but now isn't one of them. It was clear he was creating unnecessary work just to dump it on me. "Come on, it's time to start. Everyone else, get back to work," Jake bellowed, and the employees reluctantly returned to their desks. "I'll help you later." Gratefully acknowledging the employee who whispered to me in passing, I took my seat at my desk. Piles of paper, which seemed nothing but a waste, were stacked on my desk. As I stared at them, thinking about the unnecessary expense, Jake taunted me with a sneer. "Better get started, or you won't be able to leave, right? Your mom's waiting, isn't she?" The injustice of having to endure such comments from someone else was clear, but I didn't want to retaliate and cause trouble for the branch. So, I silently took my seat and began a seemingly pointless task. "Hey, everyone, don't you dare help Michael. If you do, I'll increase your workload as well," Jake shouted, causing the employees to grimace. It seemed only Jake was enjoying this. As he strutted back to his manager's seat with his usual arrogance, I heard him sneer, "Stick to the countryside forever." Thus, the troublesome 3-day inspection came to an end, and Jake and his team returned to the head office. A sigh of relief was heard from the branch office employees. "You endured well," one of the employees comforted me. "It's all for the sake of the branch," I replied with a smile, earning thanks from the others. Back home, my mother and I laughed over the generous share of food we received, ensuring we wouldn't have to worry about meals for a while. 2 days later, I was summoned to the head office. At a major corporation's head office, a weekly morning assembly is held. However, today's assembly was a bit different. People were announced for awards, promotions, and reassignments. In other words, demotions. This time, there was also an announcement from Chairman Thompson about the new president, making the gathered employees somewhat restless. Amid the murmuring crowd, the sound of a cane tapping silenced the room. Chairman Thompson, now 80 years old, ascended to the stage. He remains a charismatic figure supporting this large corporation. After completing the morning assembly's greetings without issue, he announced in a dignified voice, "Now, I will introduce the new president," bringing the room to a hushed anticipation. The click of leather shoes echoed. Dressed in a brand custom-made suit and with my hair neatly arranged, my appearance stirred the assembly. Most of the murmurs were questioning who that guy was. At the same time, there were also voices asking why him. Jake was among them. Those who knew of my brief time at the head office were likely the ones making noise, though they were few. That made sense. I hadn't been to the head office in a long time. Standing next to Chairman Thompson, his deep, clear voice resonated from the microphone. "From today, my grandson will serve as the new president. This is Michael, who is the president of this company from now on. I have worked for a long time at another branch, and I am deeply honored to receive such a distinction. Although I haven't been much at the head office, I look forward to working with all of you." What? After I finished my speech and greeted everyone, applause erupted. When I looked up, I locked eyes with Jake. He was clearly confused, yet his face was red with rage. I coolly brushed it off, acting as if he was invisible to me. This seemed to infuriate him even more. A shout broke the silence of the room. "What is this about? Why is this man becoming president?" Many others seemed to share the same question. All eyes turned to the stage. However, Chairman Thompson, unfazed, responded, "It's rude to interrupt the morning assembly, but as many seem to share the same question, I will provide a brief answer. Michael is my grandson." The room buzzed with whispers at his words. Just because he's a relative, does that justify such a sudden promotion to president? Isn't this nepotism going too far? Jake's words were echoed by others, agreeing with him. Most were my contemporaries or from an older generation who knew of me. "First of all, we've never even heard about your grandson. How can someone who barely knows the company become president?" Jake, emboldened by finding allies, continued his loud complaints. Chairman Thompson, massaging his temples, let out a tired sigh. I took the microphone from Chairman Thompson, gave him a nod, and moved to the center of the stage. "Let me explain about that. I see some of you are agitated, but please listen quietly first." As my calm voice spread through the microphone, the commotion slowly settled, leaving only Jake glaring up at me spitefully. And so, I began to tell my story. Very few knew about me. Firstly, my father was the president of this company. I joined the company discreetly because I didn't want to be seen as riding on my father's coattails. Originally, my parents had eloped and started living in the countryside. However, to gain approval from Chairman Thompson, who was opposed to their marriage until the end, my father had many discussions and pleaded with him, eventually starting to work at a branch of the company in the countryside. From there, he dedicated himself to his work, gradually earning Chairman Thompson's recognition, and rapidly climbed the corporate ladder. Though he worked at the head office for a few years, he found it hard to live away from my mother and, with incredible performance, climbed further up the ranks, reconciled with Chairman Thompson, and became the president. Then, he returned to the countryside as soon as possible and began working remotely. Mainly through emails and conference calls. He would go to the head office when necessary, but never left home for more than a week. Based in the countryside branch, most communications could be managed, so unless there were visitors, instructions from the branch sufficed. I joined this company wanting to support my father. This was a secret from both my parents, and when I announced my job offer, they were both surprised and delighted. Then, a few years into my work at the head office, my father passed away suddenly. I rushed back home, and Chairman Thompson also came. That's when we discussed the future. My father, who wasn't particularly strong physically, seemed to have overworked himself, even with remote work. Upon hearing this for the first time, my grandfather apologized for the regrettable situation. My mother, both crying and laughing, said that this allowed us to reconcile. Then, she gathered herself and began to speak. First, it was decided that my mother would take over the presidency. Having assisted my father and being the daughter of a major corporate family, it was no problem for her to represent him. Chairman Thompson returned to handle matters like business partnerships. We wanted to avoid having my mother too prominently in the limelight as a female president. Given how visibly worn she was from my father's passing, both my grandfather and I opposed the idea of her going to the head office. As a result, while we managed in this manner for the time being, I worked at the branch and received education from my grandfather and mother on becoming the president. At the branch I was sent to under the guise of a demotion, I continued my education to become the next president, learning the ins and outs of the company, understanding various workflows, and subtly making my presence known among partners and clients, all under the guidance of those close to my father and grandfather. Then, there was the inspection last week. That served as my final test. It was to confirm whether I could handle the challenges and tasks given to me, which is why Jake, among other dignitaries, was present. Following the inspection, I received full endorsement to take on the role of president. And so, here I am standing before you. After finishing my explanation, I surveyed the hushed room. Lies, that's a lie. A loud voice suddenly erupted, startling everyone around. I had anticipated this reaction and quietly turned my gaze towards Jake. "On what basis do you claim it's a lie?" "Well, but the grandson of Chairman Thompson. Your names don't even match." I sighed at his response. "As I mentioned, my parents married almost like collapers. Johnson is my father's surname." Indeed, if one looked at the organizational chart, they would see the name of the president listed as Mr. Johnson. It's understandable that a department head from one of the many subsidiaries, despite working at the head office, might not recall or have encountered the name of the company's president. You were just slacking off and got demoted." I mentioned that the reason I moved to the branch was due to my father's sudden passing, not a demotion, didn't I? It seemed my indirect way of saying he hadn't understood fell on deaf ears. Jake, his face turning red, stomped his feet in frustration. Additionally, during my tenure at the head office, I did fulfill my duties. Before taking any long breaks, I ensured all possible tasks were completed. I can vouch for that, as I was his supervisor at the time. One of the executives standing on the stage, Alex, gave his testimony. And as for my capacity to handle information, that was thoroughly verified at the branch, wasn't it? The work that seemed to be dumped on me as a form of harassment was something I managed to accomplish on my own, which he witnessed firsthand. "Lies. I won't accept this." Jake spat out his final words like a curse, to which I responded with a smile. "You're free to think what you like, but regardless, I am the president now, Jake." Jake's face twisted in humiliation before he collapsed to his knees, repeatedly pounding his fists on the floor. Security then arrived, grasping his arms and escorting him out of the hall, as silence returned to the room. "My apologies for the disturbance. Let's continue with the morning assembly." Despite some lingering confusion, the assembly proceeded smoothly, eventually concluding to a round of applause. Days later, the company had settled down. Initially, I intended to work remotely due to concerns for my mother, but with the recent developments, she decided to return to her hometown, allowing me to live with my grandparents and commute to the head office. The company, which had been somewhat passive, became more active with my leadership, continuing to grow. Jake was transferred to the branch where I had previously worked. It seems there is widespread speculation among colleagues that causing such a commotion justifies his demotion. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Here's your schedule for today." "Thank you. I appreciate your consistently thorough work." "Not at all. Overtime has decreased, and our company is renowned as an outstanding white-collar enterprise." I couldn't help but smile at Sarah, my secretary, who took such pride in our achievements as if they were her own. "That's good to hear. I didn't want to overburden Chairman Thompson or my mother, who can now finally take her time to mourn my father and rest. I've taken over the tasks requested by my grandfather and mother, and everything is going smoothly." However, are you really okay with how Jake's situation was handled? Just letting it go like that? Many, including executives aware of his actions at the branch, thought the treatment of Jake was too lenient. But I have my own thoughts on this. Knowing I'm the president and still challenging me that way shows he has spirit. I'd like him to learn and grow from his experience at the branch and then return. Hearing this, Sarah sighed and muttered that I was too kind. Years have passed since then. On my rare visit to the branch, I was welcomed by many people. While some in the branch knew of my background, most employees who didn't were surprised to see me inspecting as the president. Even so, they were as friendly as ever, offering me more gifts than I could carry, saying, "We harvested a lot, so please take these back with you." And so, to the next destination. Jake was sitting in the branch manager's seat. I had sent him there as a regular employee, but I knew he was ambitious and capable enough to climb up to a branch manager position within a few years. "Welcome, Mr. Johnson. It's not much, but please feel free to look around." Though his voice was restrained, dripping with humiliation, he no longer spewed insults. "I'll do just that. This place feels like home to me," I said, looking around the familiar office. "Don't worry, I won't increase your workload just to trouble you." My smiling remark made the employees who knew our history chuckle, while those unaware looked puzzled. Jake alone hung his head in an awkward embarrassment, mumbling, "Please, no more." "Funny, someday I'd like to work alongside you. I'm looking forward to it." At my words, Jake hung his head even lower, and the surrounding employees watched the scene with amused smiles. "What's the matter? Not drinking? Is your unsophisticated palate unable to appreciate the taste of alcohol? If you can't understand this, you're no better than a dog, you know." Having beer poured over my head by my boss and being forced to crawl on the floor, I felt like I was going insane from the humiliation. It turned out there was a devil in the company I dedicated myself to, hoping to support the lives of those in need. My name is Eric. I was raised in a foster care facility until I was 18. My mother passed away in a traffic accident when I was 3. My father, who had left my mother when she was pregnant with me at 20, was already married to another woman by the time I was born. I only found out as an adult that I had siblings from my father's new family. To my father, I was just a nuisance to his new life and was thus abandoned. With no place to go after losing my mother to an accident, I had no choice but to grow up in a facility. I don't know about other places, but I think the environment was good. Unlike my worthless father, the adults and counselors at the facility were kind, often played with us, and especially the facility heads, Thomas and Linda Smith, would go out of their way to prepare homemade meals that were delicious. Linda, having no parents herself, didn't want the children to feel the same loneliness, so she put a lot of effort into cooking. Whether it was homemade hamburgers adorned with playful little flags, or freshly baked pies, I loved the time spent talking about school and friends over such meals. Sometimes, Thomas would bring enough game consoles for all the kids, and we'd play late into the night, only to be scolded by Linda, "Go to bed." It's a fun memory. Considering I was an abandoned child, I think I was brought up pretty well. All this was thanks to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who really took good care of me. Linda, who must have gone through a lot in the past, had a saying that still stays with me. "Even if you're ridiculed for being an orphan, it doesn't define your worthiness. Those who say such things are much poorer in spirit. As long as you have compassion for others, any way of life is fine." Thanks to them, I didn't go through a rebellious phase and grew up without much trouble. If there was one concern, it was that I had to leave the foster care facility at 18. While many kids went to work, I loved studying and wanted to go to college. As my 18th birthday approached and I became more reticent, Mr. and Mrs. Smith grew very worried about me. They wanted me to stay happy since our time together was running short. I could see the concern on their faces as they looked at me. I didn't want to worry them either. Finally, I confessed that I really wanted to go to college. But I'm grateful just for having been raised so well here, even as an abandoned child. I just wanted you to know, when I turn 18, I'll work hard just like the older guys here. Mr. and Mrs. Smith simply said thank you, and that evening, we had a pleasant dinner as we always did. Later, I received astonishing news from them. There was someone called Mr. Kindheart who wanted to support my college education. The condition was to report my college grades for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and not to inquire about Mr. Kindheart's identity. I eagerly accepted this lifeline. I studied desperately for the rest of my high school days and managed to be accepted into a university. Mr. and Mrs. Smith were overjoyed at my acceptance as if it were their own achievement, and treated me to an upscale restaurant in secret celebration to everyone at the facility. I had never known vegetables could be so fluffy. or that roast chicken could be so crispy and tender. It was a glimpse into the sophisticated world of adulthood, something I had never experienced before. While the meals I shared with the couple at the facility were wonderful, what truly made me happy was feeling their love and joy. I'm sure I'll never forget this day. As the first college student from the facility, I was allowed to commute from Mr. and Mrs. Smith's residence. Since they had no children of their own, they raised me as if I were their actual son. And I, in turn, came to regard them as my real parents, immersing myself in my studies and eventually starting to call them Mom and Dad. Living together, I discovered that Linda had a huge scar from a burn on her back. It was a terrible keloid scar, covering half of her back. Back in the day, our house caught on fire, she'd say cheerfully, recounting the story. My biological mother also died in a traffic accident. I often wonder if, had medical technology been more advanced back then, it could have healed this scar. Maybe my birth mother might have still been alive too. That's why I started to dream of working for a medical device manufacturer. After 4 years of intense study in college, I graduated at the top of my class. When I landed a job at an innovative medical device company known for proposing new treatments, my adoptive parents cried tears of joy. But the job after joining was tough. While cramming a mountain of technical terms into my head, I also had to do field work and support for the actual products, which kept me incredibly busy. However, it was fulfilling. Thanks to our new products, there were times when doctors and patients on the front lines would express their gratitude. It made me happy. I wanted to support more people's lives with the power of new medical advancements, something that didn't arrive in time for my birth mother or Linda. With this in mind, my adoptive parents would occasionally look at me as if they were beholding something dazzling. What could I do to start repaying them? That's right, I'll take them to that memorable restaurant with my first paycheck. I'm looking forward to it. One day, my boss Robert, who had been strict but fair in his guidance, was promoted to headquarters, and a new boss named Bob was transferred in. Apparently, he was a rising star who had just returned from an overseas business trip. I was looking forward to hearing his stories, but it turned out he was quite the character. Bob went out of his way to dig up our resumes and made snide remarks whenever he could, acting as if everyone but himself was inferior. The atmosphere at work worsened just because of his presence. Especially towards me, he was particularly harsh, saying things like, "How did a dirty poor kid raised in a facility manage to graduate from college? Through some scam. A trash like you handling our products devalues the company. Just quit already. Instead of curing people's illnesses, we should be fixing the rotten character of scum who joined just for the salary. I'm talking about you." Got it? I missed Robert, but I hated the idea of considering a job change when I had finally found work that could truly help others. After all, it was Thomas who had recommended this company to me, saying, "How about this place?" Holding Linda's teachings close to my heart, I calmed my anger towards Bob by thinking, only a truly poor person needs to belittle others to feel alive. One day, while enduring Bob's bullying, my much-anticipated first bonus was deposited. Today, as usual, Bob mocked me with, "Eric, no money and no woman." Does he think that's funny? Although Bob was annoying to other capable employees as well, his way of bothering me, the youngest in the department, was particularly irritating. He kept going on and on about his dinner plans with his fiancée, whom he was very proud of, even though nobody asked. She's apparently a young and beautiful heiress from a well-known company. Poor you, young and yet without a single girlfriend. You should take a leaf out of my book. Elite course with a president's daughter as my girlfriend. Well, that's impossible for you, right? After he seemed satisfied with his rant, Bob finally left the office. Is it finally over? I need to wash away this unpleasant feeling before 6 p.m. I have an important plan today. After all, today is the day I'm treating my adoptive parents to that restaurant. At 5:45 p.m., I straightened the suit my adoptive parents had bought for me and opened the door to the restaurant. I had a reservation under the name Eric. As I stepped into the restaurant, I noticed a couple chatting happily. Bob is so capable at work and kind to me. He's really wonderful. Compared to him, that Eric. How long does he plan to stick around in the company? Do you think so too, Emma? Indeed, a place for elites like our company has no room for poor people. To my astonishment, the couple chatting was Bob and his fiancée. Why on earth are they here? I was so shocked that I stopped in my tracks. Then Bob noticed me looking, and our eyes met. This could turn into a big problem. What, Eric, what are you doing here? I couldn't let this ruin the special day. I tried to handle the situation calmly, aiming for a peaceful resolution. I reserved this place to treat my parents to a meal in celebration of my first bonus. What a coincidence to see you here. Is this the fiancée you mentioned? Bob's fiancée, Emma, distorted her beautiful features with a look of disgust upon locking eyes with me. It seemed she had heard quite a bit about me from Bob. How dreadful. Oh, isn't this a bit out of your league? That suit, that tie, they scream poverty. People like you wouldn't appreciate the taste of a place at this level, right? Bob started to bully me just like he would at the office, egged on by his fiancée's words. Exactly. The place loses its class when filthy poor people like you show up. Don't bother others outside of work, too. Well, meeting here must be some sort of fate. Let me give you a toast. Bob grabbed an open wine bottle and poured it over my head with force. The suit my adoptive parents had proudly gotten for me was soaked with wine, leaving me in a miserable, drenched state. Seeing this, Emma laughed. Suits you right. Isn't your boss's drink tasty? This is what an after-work drink is all about. What a waste to spill it on the floor. Hey, Eric. I've heard about you from Bob, a money grubber who graduated from college by dirty means, coming from a facility. I hate barbaric poor people. Bob's pour is much tastier than the muddy water you've been slurping, right? It's too precious to waste on the floor. Come on, lick it up and clean it. What's the matter? Not drinking? Does your unrefined palate not recognize the taste of alcohol? If you can't appreciate this, you're less than a dog, you know. Bob, with wine dripping from my head, tried to force me to crawl on the floor. Bob, please stop. My parents will be here any moment. It'll ruin the dinner if they see me like this. Bob sneered at my resistance as if mocking it. Still saying that, having a meal with your parents while soaked and miserable, I'd go mad if I were you. So, you're always being guided by your boss like this, huh? Are you going to report your incompetence to your parents? You're the crazy one. If only I could say, you're the crazy one. My adoptive parents had been looking forward to today so much. How saddened they would be to see their son in such a pitiful state. The moment I encountered Bob here, my plan to show my gratitude today was doomed to fail. I felt my knees give way, and I lay down on the floor in the miserable position Bob and his fiancée desired. Bob was like a demon. He declared with evident glee. Scum raised in a facility should just go home. Then, the door to the restaurant opened. What on earth are you doing? Standing there was Thomas. Linda, following behind, looked down at me with a shocked expression. It's over. Bob, as if his earlier behavior was a lie, quickly put on a thick facade. Chairman, are you and your wife out for a meal? Why not join us at our table over there? Chairman, what is he talking about? Thomas spoke in a cold voice I had never heard in the 20 years I knew him. Bob, I'll ask again, what are you doing? Thomas was undoubtedly angry. I had never seen him like this. Bob, not understanding why Thomas was angry, responded. What do you mean? Oh, about this guy. He's Eric, the worst scum in our company. He came here to dine with his parents at a place our level of people use, so I was about to kick him out. His foster parents must be worthless too. Taking in a piece of trash from some unknown facility is just a waste. Now, Chairman, let's go to our table before this guy's parents show up. We are his parents, Thomas said. Bob and Emma looked at my adoptive parents, not understanding the situation. Linda stepped forward. How dare you drench him like a drowned rat? Bob started to panic. Surely, you jest. You two were not supposed to have any children. Thomas was shaking with quiet anger. Indeed, we don't have biological children, but here stands our proud son, whom we have loved more deeply than any blood relation could define. This scum you just disparaged, Eric, is a far better young man than you'll ever be. Despite being drenched in wine, I couldn't help but ask, Dad, Mom, what do you mean by chairman? Having no choice but to reveal the truth, they reluctantly explained. Linda grew up in a wealthy Christian family. One day, a fire that burned down their mansion took her parents' lives. When she was about to despair over the coldness and poverty of people's hearts, Thomas was the one who healed her. Eventually, the medical device company Linda founded with her inheritance became the company where Bob and I worked. They were the retired chairpersons of the company. Their simple philosophy was to help those in need. The company, founded on this principle, generated immense profits, allowing them to retire and quietly run a foster care facility and a scholarship program known as Mr. Kind Heart. Indeed, my adoptive parents were the Mr. and Mrs. Kind Heart who had supported my college education. Eric, we haven't done our deeds because we wanted to show off, just like you. We simply wanted to help those in need. I was truly happy when you said you wanted to work for my company with the same sentiment, and if I had revealed I was the chairman, you, with your sharp instincts, would have figured out that Mr. Kind Heart was us. We just wanted you to walk your own path, that's all. Linda continued. Bob, I'm truly disappointed in you. You've been with us for 10 years and yet had the nerve to ridicule someone from a foster home right in front of me, who has no parents. It's a direct insult to the ideals we established this company on. It was clear that Bob had no way out. Still, he attempted to ingratiate himself with a forced smile. The very embodiment of someone obsessed with power and wealth. Having grown up surrounded by the kindness of the people at the facility, it was my first time witnessing someone so desperately clinging to their current status in such an ugly manner. It was almost pitiful how Bob, cornered by Linda, was finally given his marching orders by Thomas. Consider your position here non-existent from tomorrow. Bob was devastated. Subsequently, my adoptive parents made me spill everything about Bob's misdeeds, and an internal audit was conducted in my department. With the testimony of other employees who had been subjected to Bob's verbal abuse, and the fact that the incident of Bob pouring wine over me and grabbing my head was witnessed by Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Bob faced repercussions. He was dismissed for disciplinary reasons, required to pay compensation to many victims including myself, and his engagement was called off. Emma, present at the scene, reproached Bob, "What? This is nothing like what you told me. You lied to me." With a declaration of "I have no use for someone who's fallen off the fast track," she ended their engagement on the spot and left the restaurant. Thomas laughed heartily, saying, "She's quite the decisive woman, isn't she?" As a follow-up, Linda suggested to the current president, and I was transferred to work under Robert, who had been promoted to the headquarters. Reunited with a competent boss, I was nearly moved to tears when he said, "It seems you've been through a lot. I'm glad you stuck it out without quitting." And today, it's finally my second chance for that day. I slipped into the same suit I had just gotten back from the dry cleaners, the very one I wore on that day. It was the finest piece Thomas and Linda had given me, saying it suited me well. The three of us enjoyed a hearty meal, laughing over the fluffy vegetables, tender chicken, and crispy pies. I no longer felt nervous in the restaurant I once thought belonged to the adult world. Thomas spoke up. "Eric, thank you for growing into such a fine adult. You work hard for the sake of many others, and we are proud to be your parents." Linda was teary-eyed. "I'm proud that you studied so hard in college, graduated top of your class, and now share our sentiments at the company." I turned to them, expressing my gratitude for all they had done. "Dad, Mom, thank you for raising me so well. I am so proud to be your son." My husband is a manager at a prestigious company. You, with just a high school diploma, could never achieve that in your lifetime. While attending a reception at a high-end restaurant, I ran into a former classmate who made snide remarks about how out of place I seemed, and suddenly began bragging about her husband. Unaware of my circumstances, she continued to belittle me, calling me a failure and a bottom feeder. "So, he's getting fired tomorrow." What? Having reached my limit with her comments, I finally responded to her. My classmate was just confused and had nothing to say. Ignoring her, I left the scene. As a result, she went from heaven to hell, facing a miserable fate. My name is Michael, and I'm 46 years old. I run a fashion company. At 35, I took over the company from the previous president, Mr. Thompson, and became the president myself. Thanks to a referral, I got a job at this company right after graduating from high school, and my hard work was recognized by Mr. Thompson. To this day, I work closely with my employees to contribute to the company's success. In my personal life, at 25, Mr. Thompson suggested a formal date for me, and I married Sarah, a woman 3 years my junior who also worked at the same company. Soon after our marriage, we were blessed with a daughter, who is now a college student. When Sarah became pregnant, she left her job to focus on homemaking and child rearing, but when I became president, she returned to work as my secretary. With Sarah's support, I continue to strive in my role as president. Despite the busy yet fulfilling days, a certain incident led me to face a significant challenge. I grew up in a single-parent household, raised by my mother. I managed to attend high school, but college was out of reach, leading me to choose employment instead. In my sophomore year of high school, my mother had to be hospitalized, prompting me to take on a paper route in the early mornings and juggle evening shifts at a diner and a tavern to cover our living expenses. Despite all my efforts, I was barely scraping by, unable to muster the funds for the school trip, ultimately forcing me to give it up. Hearing this, my classmate, Emily, immediately started mocking me. "Can't even afford the school trip? Typical for someone from a single-parent family. Can't scrape together a few bucks. Your mom's really hit rock bottom." Emily's words led her friends to join in the mockery. I was furious about the insults towards my mother but knew arguing would be futile. I endured it all in silence. Emily, being a beauty and apparently the daughter of some company president, was the center of attention in our class. As a result, with most of the class following Emily's lead, I was ridiculed by everyone. However, even so, I had one person I could call a true friend. That was Brian. Brian would approach me when I was alone in class, and perhaps knowing about my family situation, he'd ask, "How's your mom doing?" showing concern even for my mother. We became close friends in our second year of high school, and still hang out as adults. I even got my current job through Brian's introduction. Any friend of Brian's is more than welcome here. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I owe my current situation to Brian. Truly, I can't thank Brian enough. One day, as I was thinking about inviting Brian out for a drink, holding her phone, Sarah came into my office from the neighboring secretary's room. "Sorry, can I leave early today?" Worried she might be feeling unwell, I asked what was wrong, and she said, "It's not me, it's Jessica. She's having a tough time again. Too scared to move." Sarah looked anxious. I told her to go right away and saw her off. After Sarah left, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. For about a week now, I've been dealing with a concern. It's about a stalker bothering my daughter, Jessica. Going back about a month ago, while we were having dinner, she came home from her part-time job, her hair disheveled and her face streaked with tears. Concerned, I asked Jessica what happened, and she whispered, "A customer almost forced me into his car." Jessica said so in a soft voice. According to her detailed account, a customer at the diner where she worked part-time had expressed his feelings for her a while ago, wanting to date her. Moreover, the man was in his 50s, older than me. Jessica naturally refused, but he persistently pursued her, eventually ambushing her after work and attempting to drag her into his car, from which she managed to escape. Hearing Jessica's story, my wife and I were horrified. We immediately made her quit her job and decided to pick her up from college if it got late, but that didn't put an end to the situation. The stalking continued, and he began appearing at her college and places she went out with friends. Realizing we couldn't ignore this any longer, Jessica and I decided to consult the police, but they said they couldn't do anything unless there was actual harm. Thinking I had no choice but to catch the stalker myself, I found he was cautious and never showed up when I was watching. In other words, it was a situation where nothing could be done. It was a situation I couldn't do anything about, except pick up Jessica when she called. As a parent, I felt utterly helpless. One day, as I was pondering what to do, the stalker made contact with Jessica once again. She hurriedly fled, but the fear was so overwhelming that she locked herself in her room. I'm too scared. Hearing her distressed voice, both Sarah and I felt angry at our powerlessness. Knowing something had to be done for Jessica's sake, I decided to ask Brian for a favor. I called Brian to a cafe near the office right after work. "What's the rush? You know, I'm pretty busy too. Not as much as you, but still." "I know, but you're the only one I can ask for this." I explained to Brian about Jessica's stalking situation and how the police were of no help. "You're my last hope, Brian. Can you please find out who the stalker is?" Brian had started his own detective agency after graduating from college. Hoping a professional could uncover the stalker's identity, I requested his help. Brian, who had been joking around, changed his demeanor after hearing about Jessica. "If it's for Jessica, I've got to do it. Leave it to me, I'll find out everything as quickly as possible." Brian's reassuring words brought me some relief. As I was giving Brian details about Jessica's college and the nearest train station, I heard a familiar voice say, "Isn't that Brian and the poor guy?" Turning around, I saw Emily, a classmate from school. Despite the years, her beauty was unmistakable, and I recognized her immediately. "Emily." Pretending not to notice, I greeted her. As I responded casually, Emily looked at Brian and me, then said, "Still hanging out as a dull duo, I see. You guys would fit better in a cafeteria than this stylish cafe. It's mismatched. Why don't you move to another place?" With a disdainful smile, she started mocking us. Even after decades, her fundamental nature hadn't changed, I thought. "We're in the middle of an important conversation. If you don't have any business here, could you please leave?" Brian glared sharply at Emily, who turned red with anger and left, returning to a young man who seemed to be with her. After discussing thoroughly with Brian, I left the cafe, entrusting Jessica's matter to him. A week later, Brian told me he had something to discuss, so we met at the cafe again. "Take a look at this." The moment I looked at the documents Brian handed me, I was shocked beyond belief. "Can't believe such a coincidence. Not just you, I was surprised too." Brian seemed just as astonished. "But with this much evidence, we can make a move right away." Just as I was about to say something, Brian interjected, "Give me just 3 more days. No, 2 days will do. Brian asked me to wait for him to take action. Considering Jessica's situation, I honestly wanted to resolve it quickly. Even now, it's distressing for Jessica to leave the house, and I've had to encourage her to go to college to ensure the perpetrator is caught. However, there might be a reason Brian is insisting on waiting. With that in mind, I reluctantly agreed. The day after learning the shocking truth, I went to a high-end restaurant for a business dinner. As I was heading to the restroom, I heard a voice saying, "Why is a pool person like you here? Even more out of place than at the cafe." There stood Emily Parker. While annoyed at running into such an unpleasant person, I explained I was there for work, only to be met with disbelief. For work? Impossible. A high school graduate from the bottom rung couldn't possibly have a decent job. You must be working at some small-scale operation, right? Without knowing anything about my job, she mocked me based on her assumptions. Actually, I happened to be a president of a company. I was so infuriated that I retorted to Emily, "A high school grad being a president? That's impossible. Even if that were true, it would only be a small business. That's not a real company." Still, Emily continued to ridicule me. Fed up with her annoying behavior, she suddenly started bragging about her husband. "My husband is a manager at a well-known company. Someone like you, a high school graduate, could never achieve that in your lifetime." Emily proudly spoke about her husband being a sales manager at the well-known apparel brand Y, a company everyone is familiar with. Then, she kept comparing her husband to me, calling me a lowlife and a failure, repeatedly belittling me. That was the last straw for me. "So, he'll be fired tomorrow." What? After saying just that, I left a bewildered Emily and walked away. After the dinner, I returned home. I arrived home before 9 p.m., and the kids had already retreated to their rooms, leaving only Sarah in the living room. "Welcome back. You must be tired after such a long day. How did the dinner go?" Sarah greeted me warmly, and I asked about Jessica. Sarah's face clouded over instantly. "It seems hopeless," she cried today, saying she wants to quit college. "That's tough, but it'll all be over tomorrow." My words puzzled Sarah. To Sarah, I said, "Actually," and proceeded to discuss a certain plan of mine. She hadn't been informed that I consulted Brian about Jessica's situation. I wondered why you, who are usually so supportive, encouraged Jessica to go to college. So that was the reason. I wish you had told me. I would have helped. Sarah seemed to understand after hearing about my plan. I had kept the details from even my wife, Sarah, wanting to keep the matter confidential. "There's something I need to ask you, Sarah." When I made a request, Sarah immediately agreed, saying, "Leave it to me. I have a wide network. I'll arrange everything by end of today." With that, she disappeared into the bedroom with her phone. I then prepared for the next day by taking a bath and resting. The following day, I was busy with urgent work in the secretary's room. There was a reason for working there. As I was making progress, the president's office became a bit noisy. "President Johnson should be back soon, so if you could wait a bit longer." I heard Sarah's voice, followed by a man's. "No worries. I was surprised when you called me yesterday. To think President Johnson has something to discuss with us." The previous day, I had asked Sarah to invite Tyler, the sales manager, and his wife. Thinking Sarah, my secretary, had a wide network, I requested her assistance, and she managed to contact them quickly, arranging for their visit today. When Sarah stepped out to prepare coffee, Tyler and his wife left alone in the president's office. Listening in, I could hear Tyler and his wife happily discussing the prospect of a promotion. Being called in as a couple, could it be a position like executive director? If you become an executive director, we can expect a nice retirement package. Tyler seemed to be enjoying the moment, unaware of what was about to unfold. I almost laughed at their carefree attitude but composed myself and opened the door to the president's office. President Johnson, thank you for calling us. Hello, Emily, who stood up following Tyler, froze the moment she saw my face. She never imagined that the classmate she had so disdainfully mocked for being just a high school graduate was now the president of her husband's company. Seeing her mouth open and close in shock, I greeted her. Nice to see you again since yesterday. Unaware of our history, Tyler asked Emily if she knew me. Well, we're acquaintances, sort of. Emily stumbled over her words trying to answer Tyler's question. We went to the same high school. I answered for her, and Tyler's face brightened. But my memories with her are all unpleasant. My sarcastic remark froze the room until Sarah returned with coffee, turning it into a tense silence. The other day, after being mocked by her wife, I declared that I would fire her husband, which is why I invited you here today. Tyler reacted quickly, chastising Emily. You said that, and to insult President Johnson like that, what were you thinking? But I never thought a high school grad could be a president. Even as Emily made excuses, she showed no sign of apologizing, even when Tyler told her, you need to apologize too. My wife was extremely rude, and I apologize for that, but to be fired over this seems a bit much. Could you possibly overlook this just this once? Desperate not to lose his job, Tyler repeatedly apologized. However, Emily remained indifferent, regardless of Tyler's apologies. It seems your wife has no remorse whatsoever. I pointed out to Tyler, to which Emily retorted angrily, why should a high school graduate like you be a president? It's your fault for not saying it, and firing someone over this is wrongful termination. Emily lashed out at me. Tyler hurriedly covered Emily's mouth, but it was already too late. I decided to explain to Emily how I became the president. I joined a company Tyler works for as a sales manager right after high school. My best friend, Brian, is the nephew of the company's former president, Mr. Thompson, with their fathers being brothers. Initially, I was hired because of my connection to Brian. Later, at 30, I took over the company from Mr. Thompson, leading to my current position. Despite my concerns about leading a large number of employees, the sense of fulfillment outweighed my fears, and after 5 years of training, I became the president. That's how I became the president. I never knew that, but to be fired over this. Emily turned pale but still offered no apology. It's not just for this that he's being fired. I'll explain the real reason now. With that, I signaled to Sarah, asking her to bring someone from the secretary's room. As Sarah called out, Brian burst into the president's office. Brian's entrance shocked Emily, while Tyler looked confused. Tyler, you should be well aware, shouldn't you? Even when I asked, Tyler just tilted his head. Brian placed several documents and a photo on the table. Seeing the photo, Tyler's face went white. However, Emily, sitting beside him, was the only one unable to follow the conversation. Actually, this girl is my daughter. She's been a victim of stalking for a while, and I had my friend, a detective, investigate it. You're the stalker, aren't you? I glared at Tyler, who started trembling and nodded faintly. Honey, that's a lie, right? She tricked you or something. Incredulous, Emily suggested as if Jessica was to blame. Furious and on the verge of lashing out, I let Brian explain the investigation's findings. When Brian handed me the investigation results and I saw the stalker's face, I immediately knew he was one of our employees. It was Tyler, whom I had seen several times before. I was shocked because Tyler had always seemed like a serious employee, not the type to engage in stalking. When Brian finished explaining the situation to Emily, I addressed Tyler. Do you understand why you're being dismissed? It's not just because of what you did to my daughter, but because we can't employ someone capable of such irrational behavior. You understand, right, Tyler? Tyler, seemingly at a loss for words, quietly nodded. Obviously, what you did to my daughter constitutes a serious crime. We will be taking appropriate action, so please cooperate. Tyler, fearing police involvement, begged, please, anything but that. But recalling the fear in my daughter's eyes, I couldn't hold back. Do you even understand how terrified my daughter was? If you had any understanding of her feelings, you'd accept your punishment. My outburst left Tyler hanging his head in shame. I thought it was all over. I'm divorcing you, Stalker. Leave this place immediately. Then, turning to me with a sly smile, she approached with a shocking proposition. I'm sorry for everything, but as compensation, I'll become your wife. Aren't you lucky to have someone as beautiful as me? In front of her husband, she was shamelessly making advances towards me. Disgusted by her behavior, I informed her that I was already married with children. Undeterred, she bizarrely suggested being a second wife. As I pondered what to do, Brian burst out laughing. What's so funny? Got a problem? Emily bristled at Brian, bursting into laughter. In front of his wife, proposing to be a second wife is out of the question. If he cheats and gets divorced, you'll drag him down from his position as president. Caught off guard, Emily muttered, what? In fact, my wife Sarah is the daughter of the former president, Mr. Thompson. At 25, President Thompson unexpectedly suggested, if you're not seeing anyone, why don't you meet my daughter? He wanted me to consider a formal date with his daughter. I was too intimidated to refuse, and though I initially resisted, President Thompson's persistence led me to accept. However, upon meeting, we instantly connected, and things quickly progressed from dating to marriage. Thus, Sarah is not only the daughter of the former president, but also Brian's cousin. Upon hearing this, Emily turned pale, muttering, this can't be happening. What do I do? Thought you could cozy up to me to pay off your nightclub debts. Too bad. When I sarcastically commented to Emily, she wore a look of surprise. When investigating my daughter's stalker, learning Emily was his wife, Brian suggested, something's off with her too. Give me time to investigate her. The investigation revealed Emily's substantial debts from frequenting nightclubs. She had been using Tyler's money to pay off her debts, but with divorce looming, she turned her sights on me. What's this about nightclub debts? Tyler confronted her. Now's not the time for that. They started arguing in front of us. Please discuss this at home. We'll involve professionals regarding my daughter's case and contact you later. I interjected, eager for them to leave. They mumbled incomprehensibly, refusing to go. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. When I firmly stated that, the two scattered like spiders. Afterwards, we decided to settle Jessica's stalking case for lawyers, concluding it with a settlement payment. However, I made it clear that if there was any further harassment towards Jessica, we would not hesitate to involve the police without question. Tyler later told me during the settlement that he and Emily had divorced. Unable to find stable employment after being fired, Tyler now juggles multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts and the settlement. As for Emily, she seemed to think she could rely on her parents even after the divorce. However, once her parents learned of this incident, they disowned her. Despite this, she continued her nightclub visits, further increasing her debts. As a result, she is now working in a job that capitalizes on her beauty. Given her age, it's likely going to be challenging for her to lead a stable life moving forward. However, this is the bed she made, and I hope she manages. Since then, I've continued to dedicate myself to my work as usual. Jessica, who had been afraid to go out, has finally regained her spirits and started attending college with enthusiasm. Then, she started working part-time at her new store, and perhaps finding it suited her, she suddenly exclaimed one day, after I graduate, I want to work at Dad's company. This is the first job I've ever found so fulfilling. That's what she announced. The prospect of working with my daughter is a delightful one, but there are still 2 years left until she graduates. If Jessica's feelings remain the same, I thought it might be nice to work together.